Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Well, hello, Atheists in Recovery Land, and welcome to episode 15 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast. And today's episode is going to be all about relational recovery. I thought that this would be a good episode for us to have because being in relationships is hard, whether you're sober or not. But when you're sober, you have to get to know your sober self again. And for some of us, that could be a lot of work. And then also the relationships that you had when you were in the throes of addiction, those may not be the same relationships that you want to keep. And so Rebecca and I talk about exercises to get in touch with who we are and the practice of showing up in the world, and then also how we show up in the presence of others and what that looks like. For some of us, we've never been truly honest with our thoughts and our feelings, and so having those conversations with ourselves and then with others is going to be a way of thinking and a new way of living. And so I hope you enjoy this episode. Okay. On to my guest, Rebecca Wong. Rebecca is an LCSWR and a relationship therapist, mentor, creator of the Connectfulness method for restoring the connection to self, others, and the world. After years of witnessing clients and having deep conversations about life, love, and legacy, she created the Connectfulness Practice podcast. Rebecca realized that all the big things we struggle with, fear, imposter syndrome, not enoughness, you name it, come back to the same thing, disconnection. She created the Connectfulness method to bypass all the symptoms of disconnection and address the root cause, allowing you to work towards wholeness in all areas of your life. She's excited to help you create your own Connectfulness practice so you can integrate your whole life and bring your signature work to the world. Rebecca is a licensed psychotherapist of 15 years, and her practice is located in New Paltz, New York, one of those very difficult to pronounce upstate New York cities. Okay, here we go. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Adina.
So I thought we would start with your spiritual background from childhood. So let's start way in the beginning.
Sure. Well, I grew up, I guess, in a Jewish household, sort of. It was a conservative family, but my paternal grandparents were both Holocaust survivors. So I'd say that it was more rich in kind of the remembering of what my immediate family members had endured, as opposed to really rich in any kind of cultural or religious teachings. I went to Hebrew school and I probably learned how to sound out Hebrew, but I didn't really learn what the words that I was speaking meant. I got bat mitzvahed. Again, it was mostly about sounding things out and performance. So it took a while for me to come into a spiritual place that really felt like it was mine. There's been a lot of work around that throughout my life, but I can't really say, I don't know, the underpinnings of it were given to me in my childhood, but not through a organized religion kind of setting, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you said your family were Holocaust survivors?
Yeah, my paternal grandparents.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And was that part of the discussion growing up?
Always. Yeah. I mean, it was unavoidable. It was, little things from sitting in the lap of, some of the people that love you more than anything in the world, and tracing numbers that are tattooed on their arms and wondering what those are about, as little children will wonder about freckles and body hair and all the other things that they come across. And beginning to hear little stories from a really young age of things like, you're the reason that we're alive. We live to meet you, things along those
Wow.
lines. So, that became a container that I grew up within, that remembering, that loving, that knowing that we were the reason, me, my sister, my family, those who came after, the descendants of my ancestors, were the reason for living.
Yeah, I love that. And that definitely had an impact on your identity and
Sure.
Your formation of self. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, I'm a therapist. I hold space.
Right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about your therapeutic work. So your work and also your podcast is called Connectfulness. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
I work from a relational framework, and I really believe that suffering just kind of is. It's part of life, and that the rootstock, we all have rootstock. We all have something that we can center back into, and that's the source of our healing. And then my method that I bring to it is connectfulness. And so the way that I see this is that in the face of really deep disconnection, of wounds, of traumas, of everything that's so harsh and happening all around us, that we have to try to do something different if we want to move forward. And I believe that the way to do that is by getting in touch with the rootstock, the stuff that grounds you, the stuff that is you, that's truly only you. And so doing this work connects you back to yourself. And it's that like micro and macro. It creates a shift in your relationships, because it creates a shift within your relationship to yourself. And it starts to teach you how to come into and tend to how to tend to your relationships, all of them, the relationship with yourself, the relationship with others, the relationship with the world as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I love that. And so, as you know, our listeners are individuals that are in long-term recovery or are recovering. And so there's that piece that they need to get familiar with again, that relationship with self and with others. How would you go about telling someone how to do that?
I think I come from a place of not telling people how to do anything. But I come from a place of helping guide people to tap into their own wisdom, to what they already know, but because of generations upon generations of conditioning, of what's been passed down to us, inherited family trauma, also inherited resilience, just the makeup and the shape of the stories that we tell ourselves, we have gotten to a place where, in many cases, all of us, a lot of us, are kind of going through the world with a kind of like a willful blindness. Many times it's parts of ourselves that we have gone blind to. And so a lot of the work is about going within. It's not about what to do. It's about settling enough to sit with the discomfort, to sit with the pain, to sit with the things that feel calm, which is often just as hard, and to start finding our way back to ourself. And that can often be through holding a myriad of feelings all at the same time, and learning how to sit with that, how to be in the presence of the self.
Yeah. I love the part where you talked about settling in with the pain. That sounds scary.
Yeah, at first it can be, but the alternative is to continue to be blind, right? Because that pain is what, whatever kind of addiction we're talking about, whether it's an addiction to a chemical substance, or it's an addictive behavior, or it's addictive to love or relationships or sex or whatever we're talking about, we're talking about trying to find a way to cover that up and to numb ourselves out from it. And so this is the alternative. The alternative is to sit with it, to be with it, and to have the courage to in essence sit with ourselves, to see where our own hurt and our pain and our wounds are, and tend to them with love. Perhaps love that we didn't otherwise experience, or there's a lot of other components and pieces that can come into that. But it's learning to give ourselves the things that we needed, and also to set the limits for ourselves that maybe were never set for us. And in order to do that, I often will teach my clients how to tap into their own wisdom to access that guidance.
Are you able to give a couple of examples of how you might do that?
Yeah, there's a few that I have borrowed from other teachers. One of my teachers is Dr. Clarissa Pincola Estes, and she teaches this fabulous exercise where it's sort of like a meditative state that you go into, and a dreamlike, daydreamy kind of state. And in that place, you close your eyes, you put your feet on the floor, and you meet your 100-year-old self. And then you ask him or her a series of questions like, what do you know at 100 that I don't know now? Or what would you have me do so that I may not miss out on the rest of my life? And oftentimes, even if we just get small little answers, they can be incredibly profound. I know the first time I asked myself or my 100-year-old self some of these questions, one of the answers I got that was so funny and so playful was that I needed to roll down hills more. Coming from this, hag-like version of myself, which I really embrace. The playfulness, like that. What kind of message is that if we want to not miss out on the rest of our life, we have to be willing to get dirty. We have to be willing to get messy. We have to be willing to roll down more hills. That's the beginning of tapping into wisdom, and a wisdom that comes from inside of each of us. So that's just an example of what came up for me one time, but I've witnessed clients come up with amazingly profound answers to those types of questions as well.
Yeah, in my practice, I do something similar, but I call it, let's talk to your wise self. Let's tap into your wise self. And what wisdom would your wise self give you? And some of the answers that people come up with are just amazing. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Another thing that I find to be pretty helpful is to help guide people to breathe more with their mouth open. So we all tend to clench somewhere, and our faces are one of the first place that we clench. And so when I'm sitting with someone and I notice that jaw clench, just to remind them to open their mouth, relax their jaw, and breathe with their mouth open. That seems to also begin to just unravel a little bit of that clench.
Yeah, no, that's great. I know even with myself, if I'm in a scared situation or an unsure situation, I'll have those shallow breaths. And it's, it makes a big difference to take a big breath, a thoughtful breath.
Yeah.
So I work with individuals that have anxiety and depression along with an addiction. And part of the anxiety is fear of being seen. And I know that you address that in some of your work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the practice of connectfulness as well, which I believe often begins with what I call the practice of being seen. And that means that we have to be willing first to see ourselves and understand kind of what that, all the parts of us, the parts we enjoy about ourselves, the parts about ourselves that are sticky or difficult, the parts about, like, we have to be able to and willing to kind of own our shit. I'm sorry, am I allowed to say that?
You just did.
Okay. I apologize. I could say it again if you want. We have to be willing to own our stuff. And that's a really important part in here, because in order to be seen by others and to be able to tolerate being seen by others, we have to have a good enough relationship with ourselves that we can manage the stories that are coming up in our heads about what other people may be thinking, because we're making those stories up for the most part. We don't know what others are really thinking or feeling about us. And as Brene Brown says, that if we want to get in the arena, most of the stuff that other people are going to throw back at us is all stuff that we have already seen within ourselves. So we have to be willing to rumble. We have to be willing to do that deep work. And I think a lot of the ways that we do that are by just getting really responsible about our, the places where we're not happy with our stuff, where our stuff grates on us. And what I mean by responsible is that we slow things down and we start looking for our ability to respond to whatever is triggering the stuff that we're not feeling good about, that we have an ability there, unless we put on those blinders again.
Yeah, and putting on the blinders is so much easier than dealing with the stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, to be honest and to be really fair, and we're taught from birth to put on blinders. So many of us are born into worlds where, our mothers are pumped full of drugs before we're even born. And those drugs get into our systems. We go through life being conditioned to be this way or that way, and not to have all of our own thoughts or feelings. And so that those internalized oppressions become part of what we're working through here, in addition to all the other traumas. We have to take off a lot of masks and get back down to the root of who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So there's been a lot of Twitter chatter lately, and this is not a new concept, but that individuals in recovery can't work on themselves if they are also in a relationship. What would you say to somebody that is in that issue or in that space?
I think we're all in relationship, right? I mean, whether we're in a romantic love relationship or we're in relationships with other people in our lives, our family, our friends, our colleagues, ourselves, I don't know if it's possible to be human without relationship. And I don't know if it's possible to learn to recover outside of the context of relationship. I think recovery has a lot to do with relationship. My guess is what that chatter is really about. Maybe about kind of the codependent cycle that occurs in a lot of addictive relationships. And that it's not so much about the relationship, but it's about the way that that the relationship may support the addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So say this is not a codependent relationship.
If there's addiction there probably is codependency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how would you suss that out?
Well, here's the thing about codependency. It's about how we show up. Are you familiar with the work of Pia Mellody?
Say that name again.
Pia Mellody.
No.
So Pia Mellody talks a lot about codependence. And here's the thing about codependency. There's basically 5 symptoms. One is that we understand, or codependents have difficulty experiencing appropriate levels of self-esteem. Codependents also have difficulty setting functional boundaries. Codependents also have difficulty owning and expressing their own reality. And they also have difficulty taking care of their adult needs and wants, and difficulty experiencing and expressing their reality with moderation. And I think this probably sums up most of us. Right? And the work is in learning to move from a state, we're all born dependent. And at some point in our growth process, we all become codependent. And the work of being in a healthy adult functional relationship is to learn how to be interdependent. And so we have to learn more about managing our self-esteem, managing our boundaries, setting limits for ourselves, loving ourselves, and being moderate.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And expressing yourself, yeah.
You can't make me happy. I need to find happiness and joy in myself.
And you're never going to be able to take care of my needs and wants if I can't express them to you.
Yeah.
And if I fluctuate really far on all the ends of the spectrum and I go from here to there really quick, I have to learn how to tune in and manage that, because otherwise it's really difficult for the people in my relationships to understand how, they can't do that part for me. I have to do that part for me. That's my responsibility. Right.
And if you didn't have that foundation growing up, what that healthy relationship looks like, there's a little bit of work to do.
There's a lot of work to do. But I really believe, and one of my other mentors is Terry Real. Pia was one of his mentors. And Terry Real teaches relational life therapy, or relational life living. And this is a form of getting back into healthy relationship with yourself and others. And it's really a form of what he calls relational recovery.
I like that.
Yeah. Can I talk for a minute about self-esteem?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the thing is, when we're kids, many of us are either disempowered or falsely empowered. And when we're disempowered and we grow up as adults, it shows up and it looks like shame. I'm no good. I can't do anything right. I hate myself. I might as well, blah, blah, blah. When we're falsely empowered, it looks like you're no good. You can't do anything right. I'm going to look down my nose at you. I might as well just do it all myself. Right? And what is shared by both of these ends of the spectrum is contempt. I have contempt towards myself, or I have contempt towards you. But it's the same continuum. And so I might jump around between the two because I've learned contempt really good. But if I get and so this becomes kind of a foundational perspective. It becomes kind of how we learn to see the world. This is what we mean by moderation. This is where we want to learn to flip something here. And I really believe that part of the way we flip this is by getting curious and learning to shift from contempt into compassion. So I have compassion for myself. I have compassion for others. Right? This is the place where healing begins. And, the other piece is that within self-esteem, we can either have a form of healthy self-esteem, which is based on, I know that I have an intrinsic value. I was born into this world and I'm a good human, as we all are. Or it can come from a place of, I will find worth in myself when I achieve certain tasks, get certain degrees, buy a certain house, make a certain amount of money, date a certain right? Like, so these are all now, or how others think or see me. These are all things that are now outside of us. They don't come from within. And so in a way, it's another form of disempowerment or false empowerment. We have to get back to that intrinsic belief in order to have a healthy self-esteem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Okay. I thought that we could talk a little bit about sitting with feelings. So there is this crisis of our society, talk about loneliness. And I thought maybe we could just take a few minutes and talk about what that is. Is it, can you just be lonely, or is it, can you inhabit solitude? How does that work? Because in a lot of the people that I see, it's, well, I can't just sit with this. This is too hard. This feels too unbearable. Yeah.
I love talking about this. And one of the reasons is in Dr. Estiz's book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, which was published like 25 years ago, many may have read it. There's one small little section in there where she talks about the etiology of the word alone. And it used to mean all one. So we have shifted it into this thing like, I'm lonely, right?
Yeah.
When it used to mean I was connected to source. Alone, to be alone meant to be all one. If you're all one, you're part of source. You're connected. It has this, that's back to the root again. And now we're in such a frazzled, disconnected state. And I really believe a lot of this is because we don't sit with ourselves. We're looking for that external validation instead of the internal knowing.
Yeah.
And so your question about how to get there is in micro practices, in small moments, in practicing taking 3 breaths in and out, and just focusing on the directionality of your breath. It's in walking and noticing your feet with each step that you take. It's little things that you do throughout your day that bring you back into your awareness of your body. And you do a little bit today and a little bit more tomorrow, and you practice and you play with it and you have a little fun with it, and you infuse the curiosity back in to that kind of awareness. Like, oh, I'm starting to chatter right now. Okay, I'm chattering. And can you sit with that? Can you sit with it for an extra second? What does that feel like? Just bringing that sense of curiosity to it and figuring out what is the best way for you to be with yourself. Do you like to stare at a blank wall? Do you like to go for a walk in the forest? Do you like to walk at the beach and put your feet in the water? Do you like to draw? What's the thing that makes you feel calm? Looking for those states of calmness, I think, and learning how to tolerate them is a great beginning.
Yes. Right. Yeah. I love that. Instead of trying to fill the void with substances or sex or whatever the thing might be, just learning to sit with yourself and notice what comes up.
Yeah, notice what brings you calm. That's the thing. I think so often we try to sit with ourselves in places where we're already dysregulated, where we're already feeling chaos, where we're sad, where we're grieving, where we're so happy that we don't know how to contain. Like there's so many different components there, but it's what brings us calm. Like that's an entry point that I don't think enough of us start with. Just noticing that, like noticing where you feel calm, noticing what that feels like in your body, noticing what doesn't make you feel calm, and then trying something else. Maybe it's gardening, maybe it's riding a bike, maybe it's cooking dinner, right? It could be a lot of different things. What brings you calm?
Yes. And I love the piece about noticing it in your body.
That's huge. That's huge.
Well, and I think this is another component with anxiety and depression. I often think of anxiety as being like kind of focused on the future and depression as being focused on the past. Either way, we're in our heads. And the place where we're not is like from the neck down. So we want to drop back into what's happening in our body. What do our toes feel like? What does our belly feel like? What does our back feel like? Like we want to come back into our body. Can we loosen up our shoulders?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, as we wrap up, I just want to ask you one final question.
Yeah.
If you could write a phrase on a billboard for all to see, what would it say?
Lately, it would probably be explicit with your words. Say what you mean and mean what you say.
Thank you for that, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the best ways to reach you and see all the awesome work that you're doing?
Yeah. So I have a podcast. I have a therapy practice. I run couples intensives and retreats. And the best way to find out about all of that is at my website, which is connectfulness.com. That's connectfulness.com. And you can also find me on Facebook or Instagram at Connectfulness as well.
All right. Well, thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistsandrecovery.com.